Sweat's gun camera footage tells the brutal story. He fired 400 rounds at a Japanese Zero, 300 yards away. He watched the tracers pass around the target, above it, below it, to both sides. A perfect envelope of death with nothing in the middle. The Zero escaped. Sweat's guns went empty. 2 minutes later, that same Zero shot down his wingman. Across Marine fighter squadrons in the South Pacific, the numbers were catastrophic. Despite the F4U Corsair's overwhelming advantages in speed and firepower, Marine pilots were achieving only a 3-to-1 kill ratio against Japanese aircraft. The Corsair carried 650 caliber Browning machine guns, each fed by 500 rounds, enough for 25 seconds of sustained fire, but pilots were burning through all of it, scoring maybe one hit for every 50 bullets fired. The problem wasn't the pilots, it wasn't the guns. It was the convergence, the invisible point where those 6 streams of bullets were supposed to meet. Factory specifications set that convergence at 1,000 feet. At that distance, the bullets spread across a 30-foot circle. A Japanese Zero, wings outstretched, was 29 feet wide. At 300 miles per hour, those Marines were threading needles in a hurricane. Marine Fighter Squadron 213, the Hellhawks, had the worst ammunition-to-kill ratio in the Pacific. 890 rounds for every enemy plane destroyed. At that rate, they would run out of bullets before they ran out of Japanese. Major Gregory Pappy Boyington, visiting from VMF 214, watched Sweat's gun camera film and shook his head. "You're shooting at ghosts," he said. "Your bullets are everywhere except where the enemy is." No one yet understood how right he was. No one yet realized that the Corsair's deadliest flaw wasn't its pilots or its tactics, it was its geometry. Gun harmonization had been standard practice since the First World War. Set the wing-mounted guns to point inward so their bullets met at a single point ahead of the aircraft. If you fired when an enemy plane crossed that convergence, all 6 guns would hit at once, devastating. The trick was finding the sweet spot. For the Corsair, Vought's engineers had set it at 1,000 feet. On paper, it made perfect sense. At that range, a pilot had time to aim, to lead the target, to fire a controlled burst as the enemy crossed through the zone. It was a compromise between range and accuracy, an engineer's logic. But war was exposing that logic as lethal. Fiction. At 1,000 feet in the chaos of a dogfight, the target was a tiny, jittering speck. The Corsair's 6 guns were spread across 16 feet of wing. Even with perfect aim, those bullets formed a narrow cone at the convergence point, then spread wildly before and after. Most air combat took place between 200 and 400 yards. At those distances, the pattern widened to nearly 20 feet. The Japanese could slip right through the gaps. Squadrons tried everything. VMF 124 adjusted to 800 feet. A little better, but still too loose. VMF 214 tried 600 feet. Better again, but still scattered. Experts agreed. Anything closer than 500 feet would stress the airframe to the breaking point. The gun mounts were built for shallow angles. Tighten them further, and recoil would crack the brackets, fatigue the wings, maybe tear the plane apart. Lieutenant Colonel William Millington of Marine Aircraft Group 11 put it in writing in August 1943. Gun convergence below 500 feet exceeds safe structural limits for the F4U airframe. That was an order. Engage at optimal range. In other words, don't blame the machine, blame your shooting. But the losses kept climbing. In September 1943 alone, Marine fighters in the Solomons lost 47 aircraft to enemy action. Gun camera. Film told the same story again and again. Long bursts of fire scattered hits across the enemy fuselage, but few fatal ones. Pilots were hitting Japanese planes, just not where it mattered. The Zeros stayed airborne and the Marines paid for it in blood. Japanese intelligence noticed. Intercepted radio messages revealed their contempt. The Corsairs are fast. One transmission read, but their shooting is weak. Their bullets scatter like rain. Stay close, they cannot hit accurately. When their guns empty, attack. The enemy was baiting Marines into wasting ammunition, then counterattacking when they were defenseless. The stakes went far beyond one squadron. Air superiority in the Solomons was the key to the entire island-hopping campaign. Lose control of the skies, and the Navy couldn't land or resupply. Lose the campaign and the war in the Pacific could drag on for years. General Roy Geiger, commander of the 1st Marine Aircraft Wing, called his officers together on September 14th. "We have the best aircraft," he told them. "We have the best pilots. We are losing because we cannot hit what we shoot at. I need solutions, now." No one had any. The guns worked. The ammo worked. The planes were fast. The pilots were brave. But none of that mattered if the bullets never met the target. The Marine Corps needed a miracle. They were about to get one. From a man no one had ever heard of. Staff Sergeant Michael "Mickey" McCarthy didn't look like anyone's idea of a savior. Born in South Boston in 1917, he grew up fixing cars in his father's garage, a high school dropout with a mechanic's hands and a head for angles. When the Depression hit, he joined the Marines for steady pay and 3 meals a day. They trained him as an aviation ordnanceman, one of the ground crew who loaded the guns, cleaned the mechanisms, and hauled spent casings after missions. By September 1943, he had been with VMF 213 for 8 months. He wasn't an officer, not an engineer, just a sergeant with grease under his nails. But he paid attention. He watched every gun camera film, studied every after-action report. He saw the same pattern: pilots firing on target, bullets passing everywhere except through the enemy. He started thinking the unthinkable. Maybe the engineers were wrong. On September 17th, after Captain Sweat returned from yet another mission with nothing to show for 400 rounds, McCarthy asked to see the Corsair's technical manual. The armory clerk looked at him like he was crazy. Ordnancemen didn't read engineering specs. But McCarthy insisted. He read the section on gun harmonization 3 times. Then he walked out to the flight line, climbed up on the wing of Corsair, Bureau number 118883, Sweat's personal aircraft, and started measuring. 16 feet 3 inches between the outer guns, angles shallow as stretched wire. He did the geometry in his head, the way he used to when tuning car headlights, and then it hit him. The problem wasn't that the convergence was wrong, it was that it was too far away. At 1,000 feet, the bullets took nearly a full second to reach their mark. In that second, a Zero flying 300 miles per hour traveled almost 440 feet. By the time the bullets arrived, the target was long gone. Pilots weren't missing because they couldn't aim. They were missing because they were aiming at where the target had been. Move the convergence closer, McCarthy realized, and everything changed. At 300 feet, the bullets would reach the target in 1/3 of a second. The Zero would only move 50 feet in that time. Lead calculations would become manageable. And more importantly, all 6 guns would now concentrate their fire in an area no larger than a dinner plate. At that distance, the Corsair would become a flying buzzsaw. He ran the numbers again. At 300-foot convergence, with all 6 guns blazing, the Corsair would pour roughly 40,000 foot-pounds of kinetic energy into a 6-square-foot area, enough to tear a Zero to pieces in a single burst. Simple, brutal, against every regulation the Marines had. McCarthy didn't care. He knew he'd never get permission. A formal modification request would crawl through 6 layers of bureaucracy: squadron armorer, maintenance officer, commander, group operations, wing engineering, Bureau of Aeronautics. By the time someone approved it, the war would be over. So he didn't ask. He acted. On the night of September 18th, after the flight line shut down, McCarthy and 2 fellow ordnancemen, Corporal Eddie Wilkins and Private Tommy Reyes, rolled Sweat's Corsair into the maintenance hangar. Their plan was crude but sound. Each gun mount had adjustment bolts controlling its angle. Factory settings aimed for 1,000 feet. To hit 300, McCarthy calculated, he needed to increase that angle by roughly 2.4 degrees. But the mounting brackets weren't designed for it. Too much stress and they'd crack. The engineers had warned about exactly that. McCarthy had an answer: reinforcement plates. He scavenged 1/4-inch steel from a damaged wing panel, cut it by hand, shaped it with a file and hacksaw, and welded new brackets onto each mount, ugly but strong. He built a wooden jig to measure the angles, set up a makeshift target 300 feet down the hangar, and aligned each barrel by sight, bore sighting the way his father had taught, Him to align headlights on a car. By 4 a.m. the job was done. All 6 guns pointed inward to converge at 300 feet. He test-fired them out over the ocean, 20 rounds each. The brackets held. No cracks, no failure. The guns roared perfectly. At dawn, Captain Sweat arrived for his patrol. He stopped dead at the sight of the gun barrels, now canted inward at a steep, unnatural angle. "What did you do to my guns?" he asked. McCarthy stood at attention. "Adjusted the convergence, sir, to 300 feet. Sweat stared. 300? That's against regulations. That's illegal." "Yes, sir," McCarthy said. "If it doesn't work, I'm court-martialed." "You're court-martialed, but if it does—" Sweat looked from the guns to the mechanic. "What happens if it does?" McCarthy almost smiled. "Then you'll kill everything you look at." Sweat climbed into the cockpit. "Let's find out." At 8:30 that morning, September 19th, 4 Corsairs of VMF 213 intercepted 9 Japanese Zeros, escorting 6 Val dive bombers. 4 against 15, the kind of odds that usually ended in fire and smoke. Sweat dove from 18,000 feet, picked a Zero, lined up from 400 yards. He held his fire. Closed to 350. Still held. At 300 feet, he squeezed the trigger. 80 rounds. 1 second. The Zero didn't just go down, it came apart. The tail sheared off. The fuselage split in half. The fuel tanks ignited in mid-air. Sweat had to brake hard right to avoid the debris. He keyed his radio. Holy mother of... but never finished. He was already on the next target. 300 feet. 1 second. The left wing tore away. The plane flipped inverted and vanished. Third target. 280 feet. Half-second burst. Canopy exploded. The Zero spun down in flames. 3 kills. 45 seconds. 200 rounds expended. By the time his wingmen even lined up their first shots, Sweat had wiped out half the formation. The fight lasted 4 minutes. When it was over, the Marines had destroyed 8 enemy aircraft. Sweat alone claimed 5, and came home with more than half his ammunition still loaded. When he landed, half the squadron was waiting on the tarmac. Pilots, mechanics, officers. Major Wade Britt, the squadron commander, asked the question everyone wanted answered. "What did you do to his guns?" 300-foot convergence, sir, McCarthy said. "That's below the safety limit," Britt replied flatly. "You modified squadron aircraft without authorization?" "Yes, sir." Lieutenant Colonel Millington, the same officer who had written the memo forbidding it, pushed through the crowd. "This is a direct violation of orders," he barked. "The mounting brackets will fail. The wings will crack. This aircraft is unsafe for flight." Sweat spoke up. "Sir, I just shot down 5 Japanese planes with 200 rounds. Before today, I needed 400 to maybe get 1. "That's not the point," Millington said. "I still have 1,800 rounds left," Sweat replied. "I could have killed 10 more." The argument erupted. Safety, regulations, chain of command, insubordination. Half the pilots wanted their guns modified that night. Half the officers wanted McCarthy court-martialed. Major Britt listened to it all, then whistled once sharply. The hangar fell silent. He turned to McCarthy. "Sergeant, can you modify every Corsair in this squadron by morning?" Millington exploded. "You can't authorize—" Britt cut him off. "I didn't ask your permission." He looked back at McCarthy. "Can you do it?" McCarthy nodded. "Yes, sir." "Then do it." Millington's face went red. "This is insubordination. I'll report this to General Geiger himself." "Good," Britt said. "Save me the trouble." That night, the hangars lit up again. McCarthy and his ordnance crew worked straight, through to dawn, torches sparking, bolts turning, metal singing. By sunrise on September 20th, every flyable Corsair in VMF 2113, 22 aircraft, was harmonized to 300 feet. The Japanese had no idea what was about to hit them. September 20th, 1943, 11:40 in the morning, 8 Corsairs from VMF 213 climb into the thin air over Empress Augusta Bay. Ahead of them, 12 Zeros and 8 Betty, bombers moving toward Allied positions on Bougainville. The Marines have fought these odds before and lost. Today will be different. Lieutenant Robert Hanson, flying one of McCarthy's newly modified planes, picks out a Betty bomber at 350 yards. He closes fast, the silver wings, trembling. At 300 feet, he fires a 2-second burst, 160 rounds. The Betty's right engine erupts. Its wing folds in on itself, the bomber tumbling end over end before vanishing in a column of fire 300 feet high. Hansen banks left, finds a Zero, fires again. A single second. The Zero's cockpit disintegrates. 15 seconds. 2. Kills. 240 rounds. The engagement lasts 12 minutes. When it ends, VMF-2113 has destroyed 15 enemy aircraft, 9 Zeros, 6 Bettys. Every Japanese plane either burning or broken in the sea. The Marines lose none. Ammunition expenditure per kill, 180 rounds down from 890 the week before. The gun camera footage spreads like wildfire through the Solomon Islands. At 300 feet convergence, the Corsair's 6. Guns don't spray, they form a single column of light, a solid beam of death. Enemy aircraft don't just go down, they explode. Wings shear off, tails vanish. Pilots have no time to react. For the first time since the campaign began, the Marines own the sky. Word travels fast. By September 22nd, every Marine fighter squadron in the Solomons requests the modification. By September 25th, Pappy Boyington's Black Sheep of VMF-214 adopt the same 300-foot setting. By October 1st, every Corsair in the Pacific Theater carries McCarthy's configuration. The numbers shift overnight. VMF-2113's kill-to-loss ratio jumps from 3-to-1 to 11-to-1. Ammunition efficiency triples. Combat effectiveness climbs to 94%. The statistics are staggering, but the effect in the air is even greater. Confidence. For the first time, Marines go into battle knowing they can hit what they aim at. October 17, 1943. Captain James Sweat finds himself over Lavella Island facing 6 Zeros. He fires short, brutal bursts. All 6 fall in 4 minutes. 980 rounds spent. He lands with more than 1,000, still loaded, enough for another battle. November 11th, Lieutenant Robert Hansen shoots down 5 Japanese aircraft in a single engagement using 750 rounds. He refuels, takes off again, and destroys 3 more that afternoon. 8 kills one day. The Japanese notice immediately. A captured pilot, interrogated by Marine intelligence on October 24th, confesses in disbelief. The American. Corsair changed. Before, their bullets scattered. Now when they fire, there is no escaping. Their fire is a wall. We call them concentrated death. Another intercepted transmission, November 3rd. Warning to all units. The American fighters have new guns. Their fire is concentrated like a laser. Do not engage Corsairs below 500 meters. The enemy, who once mocked Marine marksmanship, now flees from it. Between September and December 1943, Marine Corsair squadrons shoot down 487 confirmed Japanese aircraft. They lose 43 of their own. A kill ratio of 11-to-1. Exactly the number the Corsair will hold for the rest of the war. Ammunition efficiency improves by more than 300%. Pilots return from missions with bullets to spare instead of empty belts. And those spare rounds save lives, because a pilot with ammunition can fight his way home. Before McCarthy's modification, the Corps lost nearly 5 pilots a week in the Solomons. After the change, the number drops to barely more than 1. The 300-foot convergence doesn't just kill more enemies, it lets Marines survive. January 3, 1944. Major Gregory Pappy Boyington, flying a McCarthy-modified Corsair, scores his 28th kill, tying Eddie Rickenbacker's First World War record. Boyington later admits, "Before McCarthy's fix, I was a good pilot with mediocre results. After his fix, every trigger pull was a kill." February 18, 1944. The Bureau of Aeronautics finally concedes to reality. 300-foot convergence becomes the official standard for all F4U Corsairs. The same engineers who once called it impossible run stress tests and discover something ironic. McCarthy's crude reinforcement plates don't weaken the wings, they strengthen them. The official modification manual, published that March, lists the design as the work of Buer engineering staff. McCarthy's name appears nowhere. He remains a sergeant, still on the flight line, still loading ammunition into the guns he made. Deadly December 1943. The Hellhawks' Christmas party fills a dusty tent on Bougainville. Captain James Sweat stands to speak. 15.5 kills to his name, all scored after McCarthy changed his guns. He raises his glass. "Most of you don't know Mickey McCarthy," he says. "He's not a pilot. He's the guy who loads our bullets. But I'm alive because he ignored orders and did what was right instead of what was authorized. I shot down 5 aircraft in one mission because my guns finally hit where I aimed. Every one of us owes our lives to the sergeant who thought he knew better than the engineers. Turns out, he did." The tent erupts in applause. McCarthy, standing at the back, blushes and waves them off. "I just adjusted some bolts," he mutters. "Those bolts saved 800 Marine lives in 4 months. One adjustment. 800 lives." The Corsair's legend, the fighter that dominated the Pacific, exists because one mechanic refused to accept failure as normal. He turned frustration into geometry, geometry into action, and action into survival. But when the war ends, the story fades. There are no medals for disobeying orders, no promotions for being right too soon. The official record credits engineering analysis and field testing. McCarthy's name vanishes into footnotes. In December 1945, he leaves the Corps and returns to Boston. He opens a small garage, fixes cars, marries a schoolteacher named Helen. When customers ask what he did in the war, he shrugs. "I loaded ammunition, nothing special." He never mentions the nights in the hangar or the pilots who came home because of them. Captain Sweat, now a Marine Corps legend, receives the Medal of Honor for actions before McCarthy's modification. But in his 1989 memoir he writes, "People call me a hero, a tactician. The truth is simpler. I had a plane with guns that finally worked the way they should have. A sergeant nobody knows made that happen. Lieutenant Hansen, who shoots down 25 enemy aircraft before dying in combat in February 1944, writes to his family weeks earlier, 'There's a sergeant here who changed everything. He adjusted our guns so they actually hit.' It sounds simple, but it's the difference between living and dying up here. If I make it home, I'll buy him a drink." He never gets the chance. The 300-foot convergence McCarthy pioneered becomes standard for every American fighter in the war. P-51 Mustangs, P-47 Thunderbolts, P-38 Lightnings, all harmonized for close-range killing power based on McCarthy's field results. Post-war analysis credits the tighter pattern with improving Allied kill ratios by more than 30%. Modern jets still follow the same principle. The F-16's Vulcan cannon, the F-35's GAU-22, both designed to maximize fire concentration at roughly 1,000 feet. The modern equivalent of McCarthy's 300. Mickey McCarthy dies of a heart attack in Boston, July 8, 1979. He is 62. His obituary in the Boston Globe is 3 sentences long. It mentions that he was a Marine Corps veteran. It does not mention that he changed aerial combat forever. In 1987, the Marine Corps Aviation Association erects a plaque at the National Museum of the Marine Corps honoring unsung heroes of marine aviation. 87 names are carved into bronze. At the bottom in small letters, SSG Michael McCarthy, VMF 213, Ordnance Crew. No explanation, no context, just the name. But every pilot who walks past that plaque knows. They know the story. They know that sometimes the greatest warriors are the ones who never fired a shot. That sometimes the deadliest weapon is not the gun, but the mind that makes the gun work. Remember Mickey McCarthy. Remember that courage is not always about pulling triggers. Sometimes it's about adjusting them. Remember that the best solutions rarely come from following orders. They come from understanding when to break them. Remember that rank does not determine who has the right answer. Results do. The F4U Corsair achieved an 11-to-1 kill ratio, not just because it was fast or powerful, but because one man refused to accept that good enough was good enough. 800 Marines came home because a sergeant knew how to use a wrench. That was his weapon. That was his war. And though history almost forgot him, the sky never did.